Guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A videos. This is Season 8, Episode 19. Just to start off, if you're on YouTube right now, go ahead and check out the links in the description to access this on all the major podcasting platforms. And if you're on the podcasting platform and you've never heard of the channel somehow, go ahead and check us out at BDCKR Gaming on YouTube.
And since you mentioned that, it just occurs to me now doing this video. It's funny. I've played Injustice so long, and it's been such a part of my life for, I don't know, years, that I just realized when I'm watching this video, I'd actually done a 5 ultimate run, and I realized, why is it taking so long, even with the Flashpoint team? And that was my cue that I needed to restart my phone, because whatever it accumulated was slowing stuff down enough.
Yeah.
And the way I could tell was playing Injustice.
Yeah, and your internal clock was accurate enough that you're like, this is slower than it's supposed to be.
This is not right.
Without even like specifically timing it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so this is the better run. This is the one after I'd restarted the phone, so it goes a little faster.
Okay. That's kind of fun. So we've got actually a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about before we get into questions this week, I think.
Yeah, well, it's of its time, right? Like, I think definitely stuff that's interesting to us. So just very recently we watched a movie that I would like to recommend to anybody who's listening to this.
Yeah.
And it's weird because a lot of movies, you recommend them, there's like a 10-second elevator pitch, which is the idea that you can summarize the kind of movie it is by saying, well, it's like this.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it, because it also works better the less you know about it, is that it is a movie filming that is using footage from a live theater show.
Right.
And it's got sort of relatively little extra stuff done. It's just edited and shot from footage from the live show.
Right.
With sort of whatever extra stuff you need because to like understand it.
Yeah, so more than almost any other movie I think that I've ever seen, it's important. It improves your enjoyment of the movie, I think, if you go on completely cold. Mm-hmm. If you have not a lot of idea of what's going on, just that if enough that will convince you that you just want to see this.
Yeah, so in and of itself.
Yeah,
I'm sure they have trailers for it, but I didn't even go and watch the trailer, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's maybe if we come back to it next week, everybody's had a week's chance to watch it, and then we can talk about it, maybe do a little bit of spoilers, because it only came out like a couple weeks ago.
It's like a one-man show, and it's a guy mostly talking. And I think none of that spoils what it is at all.
Yeah.
And it's a weird...
It's hard to describe.
Yeah,
it's hard to classify.
It's hard to describe, and I wouldn't want to describe it even if I could.
Yeah.
It's a surprisingly touching experience.
Right. The other thing that was interesting that was sort of been played out over the last week in funny different ways. So Gamestop.
Yeah.
And the one thing I want to say before we talk about Gamestop specifically is that it's such... Because the points I want to get to is that it's so interesting to me that news stories very much are not just facts, no matter how much people would like to pretend that it has to do with just actual, like incontrovertible truths. It changes how you look at the facts when the narrative of the story about where you sort of that framework, the skeleton that you hang the story from, where you put its story together, where it all fits, completely changes it. And the reason why I bring that up is because I was reading a Twitter thread by Cory Doctorow, who's an accomplished science fiction author. He was the founder of Boing Boing. He plays a very prominent role in the EFF. And my sort of minor connection to fame is that he used to work at BACA.
Yeah. He
actually worked at BACA at the same time my best friend worked there. Mm-hmm. And that BACA is the science fiction bookstore, the oldest science fiction bookstore in North America. And yeah, it's just kind of cool. Anyways, I'll link the thread in the description. There's one where it's the Twitter thread, and then one where he's got his new site Pluralistic, where he has the whole article without any ads or cookies or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so what do you know about GameStop? What was your impression that you got about it when you heard about it?
So I know about where it sort of originated from, which is Reddit and Wall Street Bets. And I know that it was a bunch of people basically investing in it and artificially inflating the value, and that the primary goal was to screw over hedge funds.
Mm-hmm.
That's the information that I have. And I've got some other stories that there was somebody who made big money from it and cashed out and bought a bunch of Nintendo Switches and games for like a local children's hospital and stuff.
Oh, cool.
And the guy was saying like, it's cool and very heady, like it's a rush to like be profitable like this, right? But it's important. He's like, I think that if we're taking a moral stance and we're trying to say that we're better than these Wall Street people, it's also important not to do the same thing that they're doing and profit off of the backs of other people and be sort of greedy and selfish in the same ways, just as a smaller fish.
Right.
So he's like, I felt really good about what happened with the GameStop stock, but I feel a lot better actually now having given that profit away too.
Right.
He's like, to me that was like an important and necessary second step so that my intentions remained uncorrupt.
Right. It's ironic actually when you say that one of the big players that's pretty prominent in the story is Robinhood, the platform that people were doing the trades on.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny. So, anyways, you got to read the stuff that Cory Doctorow writes because it's really interesting and it's illuminating. Mm-hmm. But there was a few points that were particularly interesting to me that I wanted to sort of touch on, and that's the narrative part. And so you mentioned the first one, right? So one of the most prominent sort of stories behind it in terms of how people are putting it together. Because this, keep in mind, it's not just one actor doing the one thing with one intention. It's a whole bunch of people working in concert, and they're not all after the same thing.
Yeah.
So one of the prominent versions of the story is that the guys on the subreddit Wall Street Bets, it was a bunch of angry regular investors. They call those, I guess, retail investors because they do it one-on-one instead of like the big fund investors, right?
Yeah.
Where there's a huge amount of money moving through it. They were angry, and they realized that they could influence the market by making decisions about what shares to buy so that they could take shares that were doing poorly like GameStop or AMC and mess up the markets. Mm-hmm. And as just...
Or Nokia,
right. As a just sort of a big middle finger to just to show that they actually had some power, that they weren't just, small potatoes. There's another story that talks about how they were really trying to hack the system. So they are inflicting pain on those big hedge funds, like you said, right?
Yeah.
And they can make some gains for themselves, but it's, again, a big middle finger to Wall Street, who's been sort of taking advantage and really making money off the back of regular investors. Mm-hmm. The third story that he talks about, though, is that it's not just that. So what he mentions is that there's the platform called Robinhood, where a lot of those Wall Street Bets investors do day trading on. And day trading is the idea that during the day, you spend the whole day following the ups and downs, and that you make money riding the waves, selling high, buying low.
Yeah.
But you're looking at the fluctuations in the day. Now, what that depends on, because each time you make a trade, it costs you money.
Yeah.
Apparently, Robinhood did not charge people for it.
Oh, interesting.
So how do you make money? Like something that you normally charge for, that you're doing for free. How's the money made? And the idea is that it's like there's a saying, I think, right, that if there's, what is it? I'm gonna screw this up. If it doesn't cost you anything, and
if the service doesn't cost any money, then you are the service.
Then you're the product.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So, all right. So they let regular guys buy and sell stocks for free. Mm-hmm. They do it because they're partnered with institutional investors, and Robinhood gives the institutional investors information about what these guys are buying. So basically, surveillance.
So they're selling your data the same as Facebook or anything else, but they're selling your trade data.
Right. And so these sort of partners that they have, they are paying Robinhood to tell them what its customers are buying or what they're about to buy.
Oh, does it wait on sending through orders for other people to be able to get in stuff first?
So that's called front running, where when you know they're putting in an order, because the order doesn't, you don't just click on something and then you buy or sell it, right? Because there's a process and there's a sort of a lag, a buffer built in. So they expect a lag. So what happens during that time, a front runner finds out what you're buying, buys it first, jacks up the price a little bit, and then sells it to you. So those institutional investors or even those other financial partners can profit off you first, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing is that you could buy it and keep it, because then you know when those investors are going to be buying through Robinhood, it's going to go up too. Yeah,
so you can just make money with it. But it lets you get in faster. It lets you read other people's, almost like their intentions.
Right. Oh, yeah. So you can squeeze in before and do a quick flip so you just make the money in there and be in and out. Or you could buy and keep it for a little bit because you know it's going to go up because of those other people buying it, right? And that's crazy to me. Like, it's funny to me that like everybody's talking about the shorting and the options and the whatever. Actually, that's another discussion too, because I just learned something too, that there's two different ways to basically bet against a company that it'll go down. And the problem with those bets, one of the biggest problems is that it helps you make more money than you should with the amount of money that you've got, but you also can potentially lose more money
than you have.
Right. So there's a thing called a put option where somebody sells you the right to buy a stock at a certain price. Now it's going to be higher than what it is right now.
Yeah.
So if it goes high enough, then that put option is worth something to you. If it goes high enough, the person who sold it to you is going to be losing money, because then they have to sell it to you at the time at what's going to be lower price. Your other option is short selling.
Wait, so then what? The person who is selling you the option, they're basically making the assumption, or they're betting on the fact that the stock won't go above that price.
Won't go high enough that it actually costs them money.
Okay.
Because they're just making money. They're for a small fraction of it. And short selling is a little different, where you borrow somebody else's stock, and you have to return it to them at a certain time, and that costs you something too. No, it just costs you something, like whatever percentage you have to give it back to them at a certain time, and it costs you something too. But what you can do in the meantime is, if you want to make a profit, you're gonna sell it and hope to buy it back at a cheaper price. So both ways are betting on the stock going down. Or sorry, both ways are ways that you can bet on the stock to go down and take advantage of it, right? And the interesting part that Cory Doctorow touches on too is that if you buy options, it's a push to the person who's selling you the option to buy stocks now. Because if there's a fear to cover their bases, if there's a chance that the stock price is going to go up, they want to limit their losses. So they're going to have it in hand now, so that they need to, they're not going to lose as much. So where were we talking about? All right, so one thing I was getting at, and I didn't think I hit every point, was, so that partner for Robinhood, one of the biggest partners is Citadel Securities. So Citadel Securities gets to see what everybody's doing. Yeah. So they can see all the orders before they're filled. They get to make some money by filling the orders. They could buy some of the same stocks for themselves and make a profit on them. Or they can also sell options and make money. And so, as much as the average Joes are making, the big institutional investor, Citadel, is also making money, because they're basically, it's like the joke that the only person who really wins when you have a lawsuit are the lawyers, right? Because it doesn't matter which team wins. Lawyers are getting paid. So Citadel's getting paid because they're involved in all these trades, and they also have your data to take advantage of it, right? Yeah. And the losers then are the competitors who don't know what's going on. They have short positions where they get burnt. They have been betting against these companies that all of a sudden their stock goes up.
Yeah, so you're screwing one big guy, but there's still other big guys in the mix, basically.
Right. So what's funny is there's a fund called Melvin Capital. They had a really big short position on GameStop. They went bust because of that, and Citadel bought out Melvin cheap. So it's just, there's so much more going on than the basic story that we hear in the newspaper, because the idea of all this other stuff, I just didn't see any of that in other places.
Yeah, no, I didn't know any of that story.
Yeah. And it is interesting too, because it's kind of more than just an investment story. It's also a story about the will of the government and what people are or are not prioritizing. Because for people who couldn't work because of the pandemic, right? Pandemic's been what, almost a year now?
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take to have the emergency funds and the support for them?
Oh, a long time.
I mean, definitely in Canada we've been much better, but in the States, I'm hearing stories about how they had to fight for so long for even just the $600, and not just for a month. That was like a one-time payment.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. How did they expect people to survive on $600? But when you look at how long did it take to have them stop trading?
Oh, so fast.
Days.
Yeah.
So they're prioritizing rich people.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the stock price is going down straight again.
Yeah. I mean, it's unsustainable in a lot of ways. I mean, for a stock price to keep on going up, somebody else has got to buy it. It's almost like a Ponzi scheme where if you don't get any new investors who are willing to lay down money and who are potentially going to take a loss, right? Because it's really the only people that are going to make the money are people who were in early and sold it to the next group of people. And so there's no long-term investment to be made there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because they're like the way that it just went up and down so fast, the way people just bet on it, like it really does sort of show off how arbitrary elements of the stock market are. And in the past, right, I can understand there being more of a significance to stock. When you had voting stock, when you would, essentially own stake in a company, when you have stuff like dividends, right, sharing of profits.
Yeah.
I understand how that actually makes stock significant, right? But the way that we're interacting with stock a lot of the time now, if you don't have voting shares, if you're not somebody with a high enough percentage of the total stocks for you to have a meaningful stake in the company, the way that most people interact with it, stocks mean almost nothing, right? Well, they don't actually have any sort of tie to anything real in the company.
You're talking about, this is funny point you bring up, because you talk about this ties that we have to it and what it means. It means even less now than it even ever did before, because back in the old days, when you had shares of a stock, you actually had a piece of paper that showed that you have ownership. Now we spend so much time it's like the way money's gone. We spend so much time doing things with this imaginary thing called a stock that has no bearing on our physical world.
Yeah, there's no physical form, there's nothing, and it's just super arbitrary, right? Yeah. Where I understand there are still companies in which stock really does matter. There are still companies where people own enough stock to have a stake in the company, and that is how, like, people within the company itself actually, like, at least in part, mark, like, ownership, right?
Right.
And that makes sense to me. But for the average investor, for retail investors, what does it mean, right?
What it means for me is when I have a stock and they ask me to vote each year, I vote against what their recommendations are every single time.
For every stock you own?
Every single time.
Just because?
Just because. I think it makes no difference. But if there's somebody who's going to be pushing for something, right, that's important, or even if it's not important, I want to keep them at least honest and not so comfortable thinking, we'll just do whatever we want because we own the company or we run the company, right?
So you're just antagonizing everybody for
fun. I am.
For whatever limited amount of power you have.
Well, what else is it going to do? Otherwise, it's just letting money sit in a hoard and try to accumulate it, right? And it's not even like it's a significant... like you said, you don't have enough shares. The amount is not significant enough to make a real impact on the direction the company goes. But I figured... worse would be just giving them carte blanche to do whatever they want, thinking that they have the mandate of everybody who's there.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Was that enough? It seems all right. So we should probably put a note in the description that the questions start around the 20-minute mark.
Oh, questions don't start yet, though. I wanted to talk. Have you heard about the Subway lawsuit?
No? What Subway lawsuit?
So this is fun. I heard it in a couple different places, and I also heard them talk about it on Mabim Bam. But there's a lawsuit against Subway that their tuna in their tuna sandwiches doesn't have any tuna in it.
I think I heard that. I think. All right, yeah, okay, that sounds familiar.
And so there was a lawsuit, and Subway said this is like slander. This is really bad. You're
It's
potentially
only slander if it's not true.
They're like, yeah, but they're like you're screwing over franchisees, and you know it's our delicious tuna is. And like our like fresh Atlanticod or whatever their line is, like is the reason its quality is the reason why it's one of our most popular sandwiches. And then they offered, without making any specific reference to the lawsuit, they offered a 15% off deal on any one tuna sandwich with the promo code It's Real, ITSREAL.
So it's like Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops won the lawsuit when people were accusing it of not having real fruit, that it was advertised to be fruit, but they said, listen, it's spelled Fruit Loops. It's not even FRUIT, it's FROOT. So it's only libel or slander or whatever the version is if it's not true.
Yeah, but unfortunately Subway did not call it tuna with 2 O's. But yeah, so there's a lawsuit going on, and apparently whoever is suing them has alleged that they had like a lab like test what was in it, and it was, quote, anything but tuna, which is interesting. It's hard. I'm gonna have to see how it goes, because I find either result confusing. I can't imagine somebody being inclined to sue Subway and say that there's no tuna in their tuna sandwiches. It is different to say that there's like fish other than tuna.
Yeah.
But to say that there's no tuna in it from their test is really an interesting claim, right? That I can't imagine somebody making without
with their
any
basis.
Yeah. And then Subway coming after and saying we, plan to handle this, like we're not, like they really have the statement that sounds like they're not budging. Right. It's hard for me to imagine them taking such a strong stance instead of trying to make the story quiet and settling out of court. If, the people suing them have a right to make that claim, and I think they established that it's like 100% tuna or whatever, that it's just tuna and mayo in it. So it's interesting because I don't actually know, right? And I don't have any love lost for Subway, and I don't even know who's suing them, so I definitely don't have any. Yeah, I don't have any loyalty sort of to either party, but I have a hard time imagining either party acting the way they are if they are in the wrong. So
or if they think they're in the wrong.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I like Subway.
I like Subway fine.
I find it convenient. I mean, more so than say listen, when you're in a strange place and you're not really sure where you want to go, and sometimes you want something a little bit familiar, I prefer Subway over McDonald's. Right? Like McDonald's is everywhere, and so is Subway.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, so I like the options.
I'm kind of neutral on Subway. I think it's fine. I think we had a bunch of coupons for something at one point for Subway, and it was very cheap, and that was great.
Yes.
And it's relatively good food. You know what you reminded me of? Rick Astley did an AMA on Reddit and had a bunch of really good down-to-earth answers for stuff.
Yeah.
And so one of the things is somebody asked him what his like favorite food was or something like that. And he had a really long, good answer where he's like, I'm going to tell you, but then I'm going to have to qualify it. And his favorite food was a ham and cheese sandwich.
Oh, okay.
And the reason why is that he said when he was on tour, you would spend a ton of time in a like car or vehicle, tour bus, whatever.
Yeah. Right.
You wouldn't be able to stop. You'd be on sort of a tight schedule. And so you'd eat at a lot of places where traditionally you don't get meals. You have to eat at like a lot of gas stations and stuff like that.
Right.
And ham and cheese sandwiches are hard enough to screw up that you almost never have one that's going to make you sick. They're the most consistent, where it's hard to make a really good or a really bad ham and cheese sandwich.
It tastes very similar.
Always the same quality.
Yeah.
And so they're reliable, consistent, and safe. And so he would always look forward to the ham and cheese sandwiches at like a gas station or whatever, because he knew that had the least chance of screwing him over.
Right.
So it was sort of a lifeline for him, where it was the in a lot of cases, like the only correct choice, where he wasn't gonna have like gas station shrimp sandwiches.
The only correct choice.
Yeah, where there was a lot of choices that were gambles, and the ham and cheese sandwich was good enough that he was always okay having it, and never bad enough to screw him over.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah, it was a very very down to earth, humanizing moment for Rick Astley, and that thread was a great example of a celebrity who was taking the right sort of approach to doing that, like AMAs, that sort of self-promo stuff.
Right, because you do... I hear that answer, and I feel like I know Rick Astley a little bit more.
Yeah, and I like him a little bit more. He seems like a better person, or a person that I would like to hang out with more.
Yeah.
That was the same thread where somebody posted, and they said, like, oh my god, I loved you so much, I listened to you as a kid or whatever, I actually saw you a bunch of years ago, like play live or whatever, and I got this picture with you, and posted a link, and it was Never Gonna Give You Up, and they rickrolled Rick Astley. And then he just commented saying, I don't remember, he said something, it wasn't exactly this, but it was something like, you got me, or it was just like an emoji or something like that. It was some nominal response to indicate that he had seen it.
Right, and he watched it, so he knew what it was, so he got caught.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
So it was a great thread. Yeah. And especially when there's also a lot of examples on AMA, like the AMAs that are really terrible, where like I forget, there was one person who just was like clearly didn't know what was going on, and thought they were just doing sort of like a promo circuit thing, and would only answer questions about like the movie that was about to come out. Basically, and it's like, okay, but like we're not talking about whatever, and just like redirecting to it over and over again. Which is pretty terrible. It's
like in the old days when a guest came on the Howard Stern show and clearly had no idea who Howard Stern was or what to expect.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. You've dated yourself.
I have.
Yeah. There we go. Anyways, finally, into the questions. Only 27 minutes.
So I gotta remember to put that. The 27 minutes is when we start hearing the questions. Mm-hmm. All right.
So our first comment/question comes from Apocalypse. And they say, the problem with the Black Lives Matter protests was that there were people who were joining into the protests that didn't care about Black Lives Matter. The violent end of Capitol Hill organized protest article by Vox showed as much when one of the quotes they used said, the people with the loudest voice are all sharing the same F capitalism /establishment /burn it all down rhetoric. This and all the riots that damaged billions in government buildings and businesses are why the two events are being compared. In any case, the Capitol Hill event has sparked a cascade of events. From Twitter banning accounts deemed as Trump supporters, a blacklist being made to block anyone deemed a Trump supporter from publishing books, all the way to a children's channel executive that disgustingly states that children of Trump supporters should be taken away and put into re-education camps. Videos on the respective topics, and then there was a couple of videos linked.
Yeah. I didn't see the videos. Yeah. But I mean, there's so many things that we could potentially talk about with that. I don't think we need to get into all the
There's
ideas.
Bits and pieces. I think the Twitter banning the Trump supporters thing is something that I have looked at. Because there was... So in the wake of Trump being banned from Twitter, right? A bunch of conservative, usually more specifically Republican, and also usually more specifically you could describe them as right-wing people... were talking about how they had lost a lot of followers and what had actually happened by Twitter. The sort of big move that made people lose followers en masse was that Twitter banned a lot of QAnon accounts.
Right.
And that was actually one of the things that happened. And so it's interesting. I listened to a podcast about it. We mentioned it before. Reply All, really good.
Yep.
Their most recent episode, as this video comes out, it's like 19 days ago or something like that, give or take maybe 20 days, was about sort of all of that stuff. And so what's interesting and was the sentiment that I tend to agree with that was expressed by the podcast hosts was that there was a lot of stuff that was good and bad, where it's hard to feel good about all of the bannings, or just unilaterally good, because I think Trump should be banned, right? Like, I think that was an appropriate step. Right. I think QAnon people espouse a lot of dangerous rhetoric. I think it is really damaging, and I think recruitment of people into QAnon has really been harmful to families, to the individuals who get recruited. It is... in a lot of ways, operates the same way as a cult does, where it really does isolate you from your family.
Right.
And it isolates you from people who could support you, and it sort of puts all your support comes in the form of these people who are teaching you dangerous rhetoric, right? And who are like, well, you know, you don't need anybody else. You're with us here. Come into the conspiracy, right? And you get taken care of by sort of these people. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to try to limit that spread because it is very damaging. But it also is hard, even when they're doing the stuff that you think they should be doing, to put power in the hands of platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and specifically like the people at the top of those organizations, to basically control who does and who doesn't have a platform, right? Where I think as a general rule of thumb, obviously you do want to deplatform people, but we've seen from how long they've taken to do stuff and the way that they've gone about it and all these other little things. And, you know, just looking at the actual individuals, you know, on the top, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg, like I don't trust that guy's opinion, enough to think that he should be in a position to have so much control over who is, you know, platformed on one of the largest, platforms in the world.
But it speaks to a bigger problem, right? I mean, if you look at the solution to say that, well, they should just keep them on, that's not the answer. The answer is you need to, enforce antitrust laws and not let people have such big monopolies, or is it the word oligopolies, where there's a small number of people that actually have the control. Break them up.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he was able to use Facebook to buy a whole bunch of other related apps, like, or not so related apps, like WhatsApp. Does he own Instagram?
He does own Instagram. Or not he specifically, but like Instagram is a Facebook company.
Yeah. That the fact that when they were sort of not investigating, but judging whether that kind of merger or the buyout was acceptable, that he's complaining now that they shouldn't do it because they've let him do it. And people are pointing out, well, you lied when you first made the application to buy stuff. And it was based on those lies that your application or your attempt was approved. Then, I think there really is a problem. It's the opposite of what people complain about. When people say they complain about big government, in this case, government should take a bigger hand in it, because government's the only one that's, in the U.S. at least, the government's the only one that's held to the First Amendment. Once you put the control in the hands of private companies, they can do whatever they damn well please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just that one part of the comment where, you know, the people who were banned, most of them, I think actually all of them were Trump supporters, because being a QAnon supporter necessitates you support Trump, because that's sort of one of the buy-ins to agree with QAnon, is that you have to sort of almost unconditionally support Trump. Because
isn't that one of the sort of underlying premises?
Yeah, it is.
That there's somebody in some secret person in deep state government,
and that Trump is operating on sort of a higher level.
Right. Yeah, so it is specific to him.
Yeah, that even the things that he does that seem bad will have some underlying motivation that is actually good.
Right.
So it's true that almost all the accounts that were banned were Trump supporters, if not all of them.
Right.
But it is sort of reductive to say that it was only Trump supporters that were banned, and separate from that, the people that were banned were like violating like Twitter terms of service.
Right.
And that was just them sort of deciding to classify like spreading QAnon rumors as potentially inciting violence.
Right.
So that was sort of the moment. So I think that as an individual thing, obviously as an individual, you can agree or disagree with the decision of Twitter to ban folks, but Twitter as a company, that was not like a pro Black Lives Matter thing. Right. And I don't even think that was actually like led to, you know, or I guess you weren't saying that. You're saying the Capitol Hill event has sparked a cascade of events. It was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. In my opinion, if anything, like knowing that that's a decision that they did actually take, that's an action that they took and that they were willing to take.
Yeah.
I would have expected them to have done it much earlier, or I would have wanted them to have done it much earlier.
The problem with the inconsistency isn't that they finally did it. Really, the problem is they should have done it sooner.
Yeah. So the Capitol Hill riot did indirectly lead to that. And, you know, talking about the Black Lives Matter stuff, I think we can talk about a lot of the shape of it, right? And both of those things, if you talk about the intent or if you talk about the actual outcome, both of those things are very different.
Yes. So I think Apocalypse was making a comparison that the outcomes were very similar.
Yeah.
I think that matters. I mean, it comes down to, well, it's very much related to an ethical kind of discussion, right? So the outcome definitely matters. But what matters to me as much, if not more, is what was the intention? Because your outcome can be affected by so many other things. Because you didn't plan well, there were forces outside your control, the stuff happened that you didn't expect, whatever. But if your intention is bad to start with, let's say your intention is to be racist, then that outcome is bad. If your intention is to, well, I don't know, it's kind of reductive to say it like this, but if your intention is bad and bad outcomes happen, that's worse than if your intention is good. If you represent something that I think has value, but the outcome is bad, I think there's a difference, like a big difference. I mean, you know what I mean? I don't know what I'm saying.
And I think it is important to note when you talk about that there were people joining in the protest that didn't care, right? Yeah. I think that the idea of not looking at any one action as a monolith is very fair. I think that out of the people who protested at Capitol Hill, right, not everybody was trying to storm it. There would have been people there who were trying to express their displeasure in a legitimate way, right? Even if at the end of the day, I don't think that I disagree with those people. And anybody who was trying to make any claims about, election fraud, I think that there wasn't enough evidence for them to be making the statements that they were. Right. But I think that those people deserve the right to express themselves in, the appropriate ways. So it's not like everybody who went to that protest, I think, is a fundamentally terrible person. I think they agree with and support bad people. But I think that is a little different than, I don't push all of the blame of the type of person that Trump is onto their shoulders, right? Just because they like him. I think it does reflect on them, but it would be unfair to sort of lump everybody who protested into sort of the same pot.
There's degrees of harm.
Yeah.
Right? It really comes to that. The people who ran in the Capitol with Ziploc cuffs.
Zip ties, yeah.
Zip ties. Yeah, that's a really high level. Guys that came in with guns, the guys that beat the cops. Oh yeah, for sure. There's definitely differences, but I do think though that you fall on one side of right or wrong if you are going there to protest, the stealing of the vote, and you don't have the integrity to recognize that these were all elections across the states that had no proof of any kind of fraud. The lawsuits are thrown out, and that the only places that they are protesting the votes are in states that they lost, and that they're protesting only one part of a ballot that they're saying is fake, when there were Republicans that actually won on the same ballot downstream. Is that what they call it? Downstream?
I think so. Down ballot?
That's probably the word, yeah.
Yeah. And it really is important to note the way that these individuals targeted locations too, right? You look at the Black Lives Matter protests, and those were mostly local institutions of policing, which are directly related to what these people are protesting for, right? They're protesting the idea of police, so they're coming to justice centers, they're coming to the places that they're accusing of corruption, and they are coming to sort of the seats of local power and local force that has been mobilized against them. Right? And then when you look at the people storming Capitol Hill, they are coming to a group of people who are, if you adopt their perspective, maybe in one way or another, helped cause this outcome, right? But what the goal that they have when they're showing up there, when they're breaking in, when they're trying to disrupt the sort of process of the government, is to do something which is directly illegal. Everybody who tried to break in is trying to totally destroy or disrupt sort of natural government functioning. Whereas the people who were coming after the police stations were sort of overcome with emotion, and, you can feel how you want about the damage that they caused, right? But they weren't sort of unseating sort of the fundamental structure of how things worked, right? When you come to a police center, and even if you like burn it, police station, you burn it down, it does limit the ability of the police to patrol effectively in an area, right? It does do something, but you're coming at it with like a fundamentally different goal.
I'm not sure. Because this is the first time hearing this. I'm not sure I can entirely agree. I'm gonna have to let that sit for a bit. The obvious difference to me, or the why it's different, is less than that they're not disrupting the function, is that there's a difference between how tightly you're targeting what you're actually protesting.
Okay.
So if you're protesting elections, and you're protesting the process of it, then the place where you have issue with is the places where the elections are actually taking place.
Yeah.
And instead of disrupting the main seat of government, which is responsible for so much more than just that. Mm-hmm. As opposed to Black Lives Matter protests, where they were directing their anger towards the institutions that were actually problematic, which was police. But then even then I struggle a little bit, because there was property damage to things that weren't related to that, right? And I think that's part of the reason why there's people are taking issue with it. And I think if we focus, I feel like that's why I don't want to entirely focus on the outcome, because there's always that argument to me, that kind of whataboutism kind of argument where you compare one to the other and, well, this is just as bad. And if we take a look at what the original intention was, then that's where the differences between the two groups become much more stark and not as subtle. I have to think about that a little bit, though, because I'm not really sure. Yeah, I have to sort of let it stew a little bit.
You can also look at the different response by the police, and we did talk about this right after it happened, which is that, there was a startlingly light police response to Capitol Hill. Right. And there is a massively more severe response to Black Lives Matter protesters, and there was the allocation of resources is so shockingly different, and the force used and the brutality against sort of everybody, where in a lot of places, when you're tear gassing an area, when you're tear gassing streets and blocks, you're also like tear gassing like people driving in cars past it. Right. And when you talk about like just sort of all the collateral damage, where they say like one person is like attacking a fence or, like throwing like a can of soup at cops, like Trump would say. And they are basically just saying, okay, well, it's open season on this whole crowd, right? Versus at Capitol Hill, when you have, people breaking in, and they weren't even, using a significant amount of force at all the people who were literally actually verifiably illegally trespassing within the building. Right. And so that is a very sort of different response. And we talked about it before. I'm not saying that, there should have been a lot more police brutality happening at the Capitol Hill protest. I'm saying that there should be a lot less police brutality happening everywhere.
When stuff is unequal, you don't assume that everybody wants everything to be worse.
Yeah.
We want everything to be better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it is really challenging, and I can understand some of the similarities and some of the things that people are sort of using as sticking points to compare one thing to the other. But I think from sort of what happened and looking at, to talk about what you were saying and looking at sort of what their underlying motivations were.
Or what their express motivations are. Like what they tell you, whether you don't even have to take a guess at what they say. It's when they say, when they actually tell you what their intention is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is the Capitol Hill protest happened because the president made up a bunch of lies. And said things with absolutely no evidence to back them up. And the thing about it is that even if later down the line there is some sort of evidence that is discovered that supports anything that Trump was saying, he was in the moment willfully lying. He was making claims, and he was you can say that I believe that we will find in the future something along this line, but he was saying this is what is true without any evidence. So even if later, if every single one of his claims turns out to be in some capacity verified by the data, he still lied because he didn't have access to any of that when he was making these claims. And the people coming out for Black Lives Matter were protesting police brutality and using very concrete examples of things that actually happened.
And during the protests, we saw more examples of it.
Yeah, I think, well, the George Floyd protests and then the sort of like larger Black Lives Matter protests, I don't have data on this, but in my living memory at least, that looks like the most sort of concentrated example of consistent police brutality committed in like recent history. Just because they were constantly using force, which was totally disproportionate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it is hard. I that's another thing that you're talking about with the way that you frame the narratives, right? Because I think that no matter who you are, there is things that have happened during Black Lives Matter protests that might make you think twice about whether or not they were okay, that might potentially make you uncomfortable, right? And I think depending on the way that you frame it, if those are the only things that you're hearing about, I can understand why people who are told a very specific narrative are made uncomfortable by what happened, right?
Yeah.
Because it is challenging, and I think part of, the point was making people actually uncomfortable, was forcing a response. I think that escalation into, damage to federal buildings and all that other stuff, the sort of active conflict with the police, was at least in part to make people uncomfortable and to force a response.
Yeah. I feel like when we've talked so long about one thing, we've still got a couple questions I do definitely want to get through because we've let them sit for a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. I want to try to at least sum it up in a certain way, because if something bad happens and I think to myself, I wish somebody, I agree with their principle, but I wish they'd just gone about it differently. That's a completely different feeling than when I look at them and say, ooh, I wish they'd gone about it differently. I think they're still wrong, even for what they wanted to do. Yeah. I wish they'd gone about it differently. Two different things to me. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference that I see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So our next question comes from R3L14N, and they say again, appreciate the reply, guys. Such advice really helps. I guess the last question I could give you guys is how you handle procrastination. Other than that, I think I'm set for the time being. Thanks, and keep up the great work. As always, you should probably mute your phone, by the way. Yeah. So that was the episode where your phone notifications were going off.
Yeah, you know what the problem is? The amount of time we actually spend filming and the amount of times that I actually need my notifications. If I turned them off, I would spend more time not having my notifications because I forget to turn them back on.
Yeah.
Than I would for the number of times it's actually gone off during
our filming. So what's interesting about procrastination is I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all thing. I think if there was like a bullet, like a silver bullet for procrastination that, everybody would already know about it.
Right.
I can say what works for me, which is just spending more time than I want to, organizing what I need to do.
Yeah. Preparation, you mean?
Yeah, that sort of prep work. So like having goals, having things. What I found that's been helpful is timers, and setting sort of self-timers so that you have clearly defined boundaries between working and breaking. And one of the common recommendations is 25 minutes and then 5 minutes, I think, for half-hour cycles. I am a little bit looser with it. I do like 50 minutes on, and then I watch like an episode of something quick on Netflix, so that's like 22 minutes off. Maybe about 25, getting it set up and sort of getting ready to work again. But it's just, for me, I found that making those delineations between working, not working, and then having specific goals for a day, and then having specific goals within like a period of work, really helps me manage my own time, where I know, by the time I go to sleep tonight, I need to be done this much. By the time I finish this cycle, I want to be done this much, and this will bring me X% closer to my goal. And then, sort of figuring out what the maximum amount of productive time you have in a day is. And then if you get your goal done, giving yourself whatever time that you haven't spent. Like if I want to do 5 50-minute cycles and I get it done in 3, then having that extra 2 hours just sort of banked up because I have worked efficiently. And I think if you can sort of force yourself to do that, and if you can do it long enough that you establish a routine, that it comes naturally and it's not as much of a slog, that's been what's really helpful for me, sort of self-motivating and managing my time in quarantine. Right. When I don't have anything that's due at when I don't have like a meeting or something where I need to be somewhere at a very specific time, and I sort of get to, I need to do something by like the end of the week, that's how I manage my time.
Right.
How about you? Do you have recommendations for procrastination?
Over my lifetime, I've just really found that what makes it easy to procrastinate is when I think I have other options and I think there's other things that I want to do. And what makes it harder to procrastinate is if I look at the most unpleasant thing of all the things I need to do and I just lay into it. And then it never turns out to be nearly as unpleasant as I think it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And I've made some headway before I realize it. And sometimes once I get going, it's easier to keep going.
Yeah.
But that's just me. Like you said, I don't think there's one size fits all.
Yeah, I think everybody just needs to find some internal framework. I think for almost everybody, starting is way harder. So you need to figure out what helps you start, what helps you stay on it, and what helps you finish. And that sounds really reductive. But I think past that, you really just need to do trial and error a little bit. And I think what's important about that is actually being motivated to not procrastinate anymore. So asking a question about it and like actively looking for stuff, because you can look up strategies and then, you know, keep trying different stuff and find one that works. But if you're willing to try different stuff, that's, I think, most of the work. I think you'll get it eventually if you're willing to put the effort into figuring it out.
Right. And I think that's all we got time for. We still got another question I meant to get to, but that's all we've got time for this week.
So there we go. To finish up, first off, I'd like to give a shout out to Eliza, the child of immigrants Caton. Her father brings her a bowl of cut fruit every day at exactly 7 p.m. This shout out was brought to you by Eliza again, who wrote this one.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's fun. Yeah. Kind of wholesome. There we go. We'd also like to thank all of our lovely supporters on Patreon.
And that is Consul Peasant and Edwoon at the top tier, Last Word. Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier, Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo at the credited level, and Chris Wolf, Scarlett Danny, Awesome Gamer 2for1, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
So there we go. Thank you so much for the support, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.